Hand-knitted skirts can be absolutely wonderful to wear. The fabric is incredibly comfortable, and usually they're knit in cotton, which breathes really, really well for a skirt. The only problem is that it needs to be lined, because as nice as it looks here, as soon as you put it on, you know you're going to be able to see right through it at some point. The easiest way to line a skirt is to put a slip-on underneath, but it's usually better to actually have a fabric lining inside. So when you prepare to line your skirt, obviously you'll need the skirt. You'll need to pick out a fabric that goes with your skirt. In this case, I'm using just a plain unbleached muslin, and this is a perfectly fine thing to use for lining, or you could use any other sort of woven fabric that is similar in material to what you knit with. So you're looking for, in this case this is done in cotton, so a cotton linen blend or a full cotton. You don't want to use anything that has a completely different care profile than what you knit with, because remember, you're going to be washing them together. So whatever you knit it with, whatever those instructions are for washing, you want to make sure that your fabric also washes the same way. Now if you do use a cotton or a cotton blend, you'll probably want to wash it before using it, because that will allow it to pre-shrink and fit a lot better, because otherwise you can get some puckering and weird stuff going on once you actually wash it for the first time after assembling. So you want to gather your fabric, some good sewing shears, and I have some black marking chalk, although any chalk will do, but this will help you see what I'm doing a lot better. You'll need an iron and an ironing board, and either a sewing needle and thread or a sewing machine. And it's a really, really simple process to do this. In this case, we're using the Junonia skirt, which already has elastic and everything, so it's just the lining for this one. There's nothing too fancy going on here, so this is a really great basic lining. So without further ado, let's start cutting the lining. If you decide to use a woven fabric for your skirt, then what you're going to need to do is cut it on the bias. And really I would recommend cutting any fabric on the bias that's going to be used to line a knitted item, because it's going to have a lot more stretch that way. Because along either grain of a woven fabric, you have no stretch. But when you go crosswise like that, when you stretch it on the bias, it actually has a little bit of give, and that's going to match the stretchiness of the knitted fabric a lot better. We'll never come close to really stretching as much, but it'll be better. But it will also help you to retain movement and the shape of the garment as well. So in order to measure for how much fabric you're going to need, you need to measure on the bias as well. So instead of just going by your waist and your hem measurements, you're actually going to need to measure on the bias. So you want to go to the lowest point at which you'd like your lining to sit, and the highest point at which you'd like your lining to sit. Measure that, and then as you can see here by the way the fabric is laid out, that needs to be the width of the fabric. So in this case, that measurement is 26 inches. So I would want my fabric to be a square of at least 26 inches. But, of course, you have to remember you're going to have seams in here. So add at least 2 inches to that measurement, in this case 28. So my fabric is about 30 inches wide. So I have plenty of extra fabric, and as you can see, it's set up on the bias here. Now, you'll need 2 pieces of exactly the same size, because there's going to be 2 pieces of the lining. So be sure, whatever you get, if it's a square, in this case 30 inches by 30 inches, you need 2 times that. So if you got a fabric that was, say, 60 inches wide, then all you would need is 30 inches of it. You could buy 1 yard, and that would be plenty enough to line your skirt. But if the fabric that you buy is 45 inches, like many quilters' cottons, and in fact this fabric here, then you will need to buy a little bit more. Or of course, you know, if you're using some fabric you have stashed away or leftovers from another project, you know, you'll just need to get creative with measuring out a square that works with your bias measurement. So once you have your fabric chosen and you have your little squares cut, you would put both pieces of the fabric underneath the skirt. And in this case, I have the right sides facing together, so this is the wrong side of the fabric, and that's the side I'm going to draw on. And you want to make sure that you've got plenty of fabric around the outside, so you have lots of room to cut off in the margins here. So then what you're going to want to do is use your chalk or pencil, or you can use the disappearing ink markers and all sorts of things like that. And you're going to trace the outside of the skirt. So you want to go about 1 inch on the outside, 5/8 of an inch to 1 inch, and just make a simple line. Now once you get up to the top, as you can see, this skirt happens to have an elastic waistband. So you want to trace around the stretched measurement, because you're going to want this lining to stretch when you're putting the skirt on. So in this case, what I'm going to do, it stretches to about there, so I'm going to make sure that my cut goes all the way to there. And it'll stretch to there, so make sure that this line goes here. So you can see it's quite a bit wider than it looks like it would need to be, but you'll need that little bit of extra fabric there. Okay, so that's where I want that to end. So about 1 inch on the bottom. Now, I'm going to need to actually go in there and lift this up and sort of trace a line across here. And trace around for the actual seam line. I'm just making a little dotted line very close to the edge of the garment, because that's the line along which I will actually do the seaming. And so here, even though the skirt kind of goes in on the top, I'm going to follow the line that I traced. Do the same thing on this side. And now, here's the top line of where I want it to come to. I need 1 inch above that. Fold this down and sort of trace across. If you have a ruler or a French ruler, French curve, things like that, that would work really well. So this will become the top hem, and along this line here, this is where it'll actually get sewn onto the inside of the top hem of the skirt. And this will get folded under. So I'll do the same down here. I've marked out the lowest point of sewing, and then about 1 inch below that for a seam allowance. This is going to be a little bit more curved here. So this is one place where if you have a flat edge skirt, obviously this one has a really roughly edge, if you have a flat edge skirt, it works really well to trace along that. So basically, that is my lining pattern. So that was pretty simple, and then really all you have to do is just make sure that both layers are flat to each other, and you just cut out along the outer edge through both layers of fabric. Now the best part is, since you've already got both of your pieces right sides facing on top of each other, cut out, completely lined up, at this point you would simply pin it together along the side seams. You'll want to sew the side seams first, and either take it to a sewing machine or you could hand sew it. So you would just take your pins and pin it together down the side seam. And we're going to break out the sewing machine and sew this together.